A couple of years ago, I thought that I had personal finance completely figured out, or at least I thought I knew what the goal was, and that goal was to make the mathematically correct decision every time. If there was a spreadsheet that said one option was better than another, well then that was the answer. Simple. But over the last couple of years, I've realised something that has completely changed how I think about money. The financially optimal decision and the right decision are not always the same thing. And honestly, I think that's one of the most dangerous traps in personal finance, because the deeper I get into investing in money, the more advice I come across that made perfect sense on paper, but didn't necessarily make my life any better. And that's become a bit of a problem, because I genuinely like numbers. I like spreadsheets, I like analysing things, I like finding ways to improve. But at some point, I realised I was spending so much time trying to optimize money that I wasn't asking a much more important question. And that question is, what am I actually trying to achieve? Because I didn't start investing so that I could become a human spreadsheet. I started investing because I wanted more options later in life. Less stress, more freedom, a bit more flexibility, and that's a very different objective. I think that's when most people first get interested in personal finance. They go through a similar phase from what I've seen. You discover podcasts, you discover YouTube, you discover investing, and suddenly there seems to be an answer for everything. And this video should not be considered financial advice for yourself. You should do your own research and remember that your capital is at risk. For the prime example, I see so many things like overpay your mortgage, don't overpay your mortgage, maximize cashback, optimize your pension, optimize your ISA, get a credit card, don't get a credit card, lease a car, buy a car, finance a car, buy a £500 ex-taxi with 272,000 miles on the clock and invest the difference. Before long, every decision feels like it has a right answer. And for a while, I did really like that. It felt productive, it felt like I was learning, it felt like I was getting ahead. But eventually I just realised something, and that was that the more I optimised money, the more I thought about money, and I'm not sure that's actually the goal. I'll use my residential mortgage for example, and this is probably the advice that I see most often, and that is don't overpay a low interest mortgage. So my mortgage is fixed at 1.74% until the middle of 2027. And whenever I've talked about overpayments on this channel, lots of people have quite rightly pointed out that savings accounts are paying more than that, or that investing should outperform that over the long term, and from a purely mathematical perspective, they are probably right. Let's imagine I have £1,000. If I pay it down as an extra payment against the mortgage, I'm effectively saving 1.74%. If I can get 4% in savings or potentially get higher returns through elsewhere, then the spreadsheet says that those things are better options. And this is where things get interesting, because I agree with the maths, I just don't always agree with the conclusion. When I first got interested in personal finance, I thought that the spreadsheet was the entire story, but now I think that it's only part of the story, and actually a smaller part of the story than I first thought. The spreadsheet doesn't know what interest rates will be in 2027. The spreadsheet doesn't know how secure my job will feel. The spreadsheet doesn't know what life is going to throw at me over the next decade. The spreadsheet certainly doesn't know how I'll feel when I see a smaller mortgage balance. And that's where I started changing my thinking. I realized that personal financial decisions aren't just purely mathematical. They're emotional, they're behavioral, they're personal finance, right? A smaller mortgage balance doesn't just change a number, it changes risk, it changes security, it changes peace of mind. And to be clear, I'm not saying that everybody should overpay their mortgage, far from it. In fact, my own thinking on this subject has changed several times over the last few years. That's the point. The point is that I stopped assuming the spreadsheet automatically had the final say, and that idea started appearing elsewhere as well. So the next one is credit cards, and this might be controversial because I know lots of financially savvy people do this successfully, but the advice is usually to put every single possible purchase on a credit card, collect points, collect cashback, pay it off in full every month. Free money, right? And again, I do understand the logic. Who doesn't like free money? I certainly like free money. But I've always felt slightly uncomfortable with it. Now, Mrs. The Compounding Project and I have spent years building a consumer debt-free life, but mostly because I think that behaviour matters far more than people actually realise. I've seen studies suggesting people spend more money when using credit cards compared to cash or debit cards, and honestly, I don't find that surprising at all. When money leaves my bank account immediately, it feels real. I feel it, I notice it. It creates a tiny moment of friction. It gets me thinking, do I actually want this thing, or do I actually need this thing? Would I still buy it if I had to pay for it right now? Now, maybe I'd be perfectly disciplined with a credit card, maybe not, but here's the thing, I don't really care because I don't want to spend the rest of my life trying to squeeze another £50 or £100 a year out of financial optimizations if it increases the chances that I spend more elsewhere. The irony is that sometimes the best financial decision is simply avoiding purchases in the first place, and that doesn't show up on a cashback statement. And the same thing applies to cars. This one always makes me smile a little bit. You'll often hear people say that leasing a car is sensible because you avoid repair bills, predictable costs, no nasty surprises, no expensive garage visits. And again, I do completely understand the appeal. I really do. People saying, motoring is then a fixed expense for me. There's no unknown with that. But every time I run the numbers, I come back to the same conclusion. I don't want another monthly payment. Let's say that somebody leases a car for £300 a month, and I don't think that figure is entirely unrealistic in 2026. That is £3,600 per year. Over 5 years, that's £18,000. £18,000. And every time I hear people talking about repair bills, I find myself asking that same question. How many repair bills are we expecting? Because my £500, 272,000 mile ex-taxi Toyota would have to become one of the most unreliable vehicles ever built before it cost me anywhere near £18,000 over the 5 years. Now, I know that obviously there are other reasons to have a newer car. Comfort, safety, potentially reliability, enjoyment even. I completely get that. But let's be honest about what we're buying here. We're not avoiding repair bills, we're buying a newer car. And that is absolutely fine, by the way, but they're not the same thing. And this is where I think that all those examples come together. So mortgage overpayments, credit cards, cars, on the surface they seem unrelated, but underneath they're actually asking exactly the same question. Am I optimizing the spreadsheet or am I optimizing my life? Because those two things are not always the same. One of the biggest surprises since I started investing is that simplicity has become much more valuable to me, not less. I thought that as I earned more and learned more, my financial life would become more complicated, so more accounts, more optimization, more sophistication, but instead the opposite has happened. I increasingly find myself wanting a system that is just simple, a system that I can repeat, a system that I don't have to think about all the time, because I think that one of the hidden costs of financial optimization is the mental bandwidth of it all. You can spend hours deciding where every pound should go, hours comparing rates and comparing products and chasing those tiny little financial improvements, and I sometimes wonder whether we ever stop to ask what those hours are worth. If I spend hundreds of hours over the next decade optimizing every financial decision, will it improve my life? And the answer is probably maybe, but also maybe not. But what I do know is that time is finite, attention is finite, and mental energy is definitely finite. And increasingly, I want to spend those things on people, hobbies, health and experiences, not endlessly tweaking spreadsheets, because ultimately the reason that I've been investing into my stocks and shares ISA every month isn't to win a finance competition, it's to build options. That's it, that's the whole goal. More options, more flexibility, less stress, and hopefully more freedom in later life. And when I look at money through that lens, something interesting happens. The mathematically perfect decision becomes less important, the sustainable decision becomes more important, the repeatable decision becomes more important, the decision that helps me sleep at night becomes more important, and the decision that helps me stick with the plan becomes, as I say, more important. For a long time, I thought that successful personal finance meant making perfect decisions, and now I think that successful personal finance means building a system that's good enough and sticking with it for decades. Because consistency compounds too, not just money, but also behaviours, Habits, discipline, patience, all of those things stack and compound. And that's why there are pieces of financial advice that I just completely ignore. And that's not because they're necessarily wrong, and it's not because the maths doesn't work, but it's because I've realized that optimizing money and optimizing life aren't always exactly the same thing. And if I have to choose between the two, I'm increasingly choosing the one that helps me enjoy the journey. So thank you very much for watching. Please do subscribe to follow along that journey if you are interested. Thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next one.